The vanilla buttercream slid down my cheek in thick globs. Time seemed to stop as every eye in the banquet hall locked onto me. The holiday music continued playing cheerfully in the background, a mocking contrast to the cruel scene unfolding. "Clean up the mess, janitor," Grant sneered, waving the empty plate in my direction. "That's what you're actually good at, right?" My designer dress, the one I'd saved 3 paychecks for, was now splattered with cake. The room's temperature seemed to plummet as awkward titters rippled through the crowd. 7 years of innovative designs, sleepless nights perfecting prototypes, and sacrifice had led to this moment of pure humiliation. "I mean, really," Grant continued, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet room. "Did you honestly think that dress would make people forget where you belong? The cleaning staff is downstairs, sweetie." My hands trembled slightly as I reached for a napkin. No one moved to help. These were my colleagues, people I'd collaborated with for years, yet they all stood frozen, champagne glasses clutched in their hands, expressions ranging from shock to pity to barely concealed amusement. Then something shifted. A figure pushed through from the back of the crowd, Ava from Money Management. She wasn't smiling. Her gaze was steel as she pointed directly at me. "She's the new CEO." The words seemed to echo, once, twice, 3 times. Grant's smug expression vanished. The plate slipped from his fingers, clattering to the floor. "What did you just say?" Ava stepped forward, holding up her phone. The board notification just went out. Company-wide announcement. All eyes swung from my cake-smeared face to Grant's rapidly paling complexion. His mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for water. And that's when the board chairman stepped into the center of the room, microphone in hand, ready to make the official announcement that would change everything. If you're enjoying this journey of sweet revenge so far, take a second to hit that like button and subscribe to hear how this story unfolds. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. And if you've ever dealt with a toxic boss, drop a comment below. I read every single one. My name is Petra Nova, and until that moment, I'd been the invisible backbone of Kitchenverse. Not that you'd know it from looking at the company's public face. My designs for innovative cooking tools had propelled us from struggling startup to industry leader. Yet my name appeared nowhere on the patents. Grant made sure of that. I grew up in a small apartment with a mother who turned our tiny kitchen into a wonderland. She could conjure feasts from nothing, making tools do things their manufacturers never intended. "Innovation comes from necessity," she'd say, bending a wire hanger into a specialized whisk for her famous soufflé. That ingenuity sparked something in me, a passion for creating things that made everyday tasks extraordinary. After design school, I landed at Kitchenverse when it was just 8 employees working out of a converted warehouse. Old Man Harrington, the founder, recognized something in me during the interview. "You have hands that understand problems," he'd said, watching me automatically reorganize the prototype pieces scattered across his desk. For 3 years, I worked directly with Harrington. We developed revolutionary products together: the self-adjusting measuring spoon, the heat-distributing pan handle, the moisture control storage system. Each one started as a sketch in my notebook and ended as a bestseller in kitchen stores nationwide. Then Harrington's health began failing. The company needed new leadership, and in walked Grant, Harrington's sister's son, with his business degree and 0 practical experience. He was appointed as temporary director of product development. My direct line to Harrington disappeared overnight. Grant's first action was moving my desk from the open design space to a converted supply closet. His second was taking my name off the Reynolds Cutter project, a gadget I'd spent 18 months perfecting. "Company streamlining," he explained when I confronted him. "No room for ego and teamwork, Petra." I considered quitting almost daily, but the projects themselves kept me anchored. I loved designing things that solved problems, that made people's eyes light up with that, "Why didn't I think of that?" expression. And despite everything, Harrington would occasionally appear in my closet office, asking about new ideas, seeming genuinely interested even as his health deteriorated. What I didn't know was that Harrington saw everything. While I worked in isolation, he watched Grant systematically dismantle the collaborative environment he'd built. Harrington was dying, but he wasn't blind. Standing in that banquet hall, cake dripping from my face. I finally understood the strange meeting Harrington had requested 3 weeks before his death. He'd ask detailed questions about every project, insisting I bring my original sketches and notes. At the time, I thought he was feeling nostalgic. Mr. Harrington passed, knowing exactly who built this company, the chairman announced, his voice cutting through my memories. His final amendment to the corporate structure was quite specific. Grant lunged toward the chairman. "This is absurd. She's a designer, not a business. She's the reason we've outperformed every competitor for 5 consecutive years," the chairman interrupted. According to the board's analysis, the crowd parted as I walked forward, still wiping icing from my collarbone. 7 years of being silenced, belittled, and stolen, from crystallized into a strange calm. "Please," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "Everyone enjoy your evening. Tomorrow brings a new chapter for all of us." I turned to Grant, whose face had shifted from shock to something darker, "including you," I added quietly. That night, I barely slept. My apartment felt suddenly different, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. I sat at my kitchen table until dawn, sketching not products but plans. Not revenge, I told myself, but reconstruction. When I arrived at the office the next morning, the security guard did a double take before quickly opening the door. "Congratulations, Ms. Nova." The executive elevator, previously off limits to me, opened at my keycard's touch. The top floor was quiet, most employees not due for hours. But Grant was already there, pacing outside the CEO office, Harrington's old office. "This is insane," he spat when he saw me. "You can't possibly run this place. The clients won't accept it. The investors will panic." I brushed past him and unlocked the door. "My uncle was clearly not in his right mind when he made this decision," Grant continued, following me inside. "I've already called my attorney." The office was exactly as Harrington had left it, meticulously organized chaos. Prototype pieces, sketches, and engineering reports covered every surface. I ran my fingers over a half-completed design for a child-safe peeler. "Your attorney will find everything in order," I replied, setting my bag down on the desk. "But don't worry about your position here." Relief flickered across Grant's face, quickly replaced by suspicion. "The production area needs experienced oversight," I continued. "You start today." "Production? You mean the factory floor? That's ridiculous. I'm the director of—" "Not anymore." I turned to face him fully. "Mr. Harrington left very specific instructions about restructuring. Every executive must now have hands-on experience in all aspects of creation. You begin with production." Grant's face flushed red. "I won't do it. You can't force me to work on an assembly line like some essential worker who makes our company possible," I finished. "Your choice is simple. Accept the position or resign." His mouth snapped shut. We both knew resignation would mean surrendering his stock options and the considerable inheritance Harrington had tied to his employment. His uncle had been cleverer than either of us realized. "Fine," he finally hissed. "But this little power trip won't last, Petra. The board will see what a mistake this is within a month." As he stormed out, I noticed the company handbook on Harrington's shelf. I pulled it down, already forming an idea that would either rebuild Kitchenverse from the ground up or tear it apart completely. 3 days later, I called the first all-company meeting in Kitchenverse history. Every employee, from design to packaging to shipping, gathered in the main presentation hall. "For too long, we've operated as separate islands," I began, looking out at the uncertain faces. Designers creating products without understanding manufacturing constraints. Sales promising features without consulting engineers. Management making decisions without experiencing the consequences. I unveiled my plan, a rotation system. Every employee would spend 2 weeks each quarter working in a different department. Executives would start first. "We cannot create exceptional tools for home kitchens if we don't understand every aspect of bringing them to life," I explained. "This isn't punishment, it's education." The room buzzed with reactions. Excitement from those who'd felt ignored, apprehension from those comfortable in their silos, outright hostility from most of the executive team. Grant sat in the back row, arms crossed, expression thunderous. He'd spent 3 days in production and already filed 2 formal complaints about unsuitable working conditions, conditions he himself had created through years of budget cuts. After the meeting, Ava from Money Management caught me in the hallway. "Bold move," she said. "Grant's already rallying people against you, saying you're dismantling the company structure out of spite." "Let him," I replied. "The quarterly numbers will speak for themselves." "If you last that long," Ava cautioned, "watch your back, Petra. Grant's not the only one who benefited from the old system." She was right. The next few weeks brought passive resistance from every corner. Files mysteriously disappeared before presentations. Production schedules got accidentally altered. Vendor communications went unanswered. I responded by working longer hours, double-checking everything personally, and continuing to push the rotation program forward. Each morning, I walked the production floor. Each afternoon, I sat with the design team. Each evening, I reviewed financial projections with Ava, who'd become an unexpected ally. 1 month in, I received an invitation to present at the National Kitchen Innovation Convention, the industry's most prestigious gathering. Kitchenverse had showcase space for our spring product line, which had been in development before Harrington's death. When I reviewed the presentation materials, my stomach tightened. The products were safe, predictable, minor variations on existing successes. Nothing like the boundary-pushing designs that had built our reputation. I called an emergency design meeting. "These aren't Kitchenverse products," I said, spreading the mock-ups across the table. "Where's the innovation? The problem-solving?" Cam, our senior designer, cleared his throat. Grant rejected anything too experimental, said buyers want familiar, not revolutionary. "Show me the rejected concepts," I demanded. Hesitantly, Cam brought out a dusty portfolio. Inside were dozens of designs, brilliant, unusual approaches to common kitchen challenges. My own sketches were there too, ideas Grant had dismissed as women's fantasy thinking. "How quickly can we prototype these?" I asked, already mentally calculating timelines. 8 weeks minimum," Cam replied. "The convention is in 7. Then we work overnight shifts," I decided. "Voluntary, with double overtime." "The budget," someone began. "I'll handle the budget," I interrupted. "Who's with me?" To my surprise, hands rose throughout the room. Not everyone, but enough. That night, we began. Designers, engineers, and production specialists working side by side, fueled by pizza and the exhilaration of creating without constraints. Even some executive team members joined in, their rotation experiences having opened their eyes to possibilities they'd never considered. Grant, of course, refused to participate. Instead, he continued his campaign of undermining and complaining, now openly predicting disaster at the convention. 6 weeks of around-the-clock work produced prototypes that exceeded even my expectations. The adjustable pressure cutting board that accommodated different food textures, the intuitive temperature-sensing spoon that changed color before reaching burning point, the modular storage system that adapted to any kitchen layout. With days to spare, we had a presentation that truly represented what Kitchenverse could be. The night before the convention, I found Grant waiting in my office. "You've gone too far," he said without preamble. "The board won't support this reckless waste of resources." "The board already approved the showcase," I replied, continuing to gather my materials. "Because they don't know you've scrapped the approved line for your pet projects." He slammed his hand on the desk. "I've documented everything, Petra. Tomorrow will be your last day as CEO." I looked up at him. This man who'd spent years taking credit for others' innovation while systematically dismantling the creative environment his uncle had built. "Come to the convention, Grant," I said calmly. "See for yourself what happens when people are allowed to actually create." "Oh, I'll be there," he promised darkly. Front row. The convention center buzzed with activity as vendors from across the country set up elaborate booths. Kitchenverse had prime positioning, center hall, maximum visibility, a legacy of our previous success. Our team worked with practiced efficiency, arranging the new prototypes under subtle lighting that highlighted their innovative features without giving away surprises. I straightened my jacket, checking my reflection in the chrome surface of our display counter. "No cake today, just determination." "They're here," Cam murmured, nodding toward the entrance where a group of industry buyers and reporters filed in. Among them, I spotted Grant, walking alongside two board members. His smile looked painted on. "Places, everyone," I said quietly. "Remember, let them discover the magic themselves." The next hour passed in a blur of demonstrations and conversations. I moved from station to station, watching faces transform from polite interest to genuine excitement as they engaged with our prototypes. The adaptive cutting board drew audible gasps when people realized how it adjusted pressure based on the food being prepared. The temperature-sensing spoon had a crowd 3 deep as word spread about its capabilities. Through it all, Grant hovered at the edges, his expression darkening as buyer after buyer stopped to shake my hand, requesting private meetings to discuss exclusive distribution rights. By mid-afternoon, our booth had become the must-see destination of the convention. Industry reporters clustered around, capturing video of the demonstrations. The hashtag #KitchenVerseRevolution was trending on social platforms. That's when I noticed the board members huddled together, their expressions serious as they beckoned Grant over. He gesticulated animatedly, his face flushed, pointing repeatedly in my direction. Ava appeared at my elbow. "Incoming," she whispered. Grant pulled his trump card. Before I could respond, the senior board member, Teresa Williams, approached me. "A word, Ms. Nova?" Privately? I followed her to a quiet corner behind our display, pulse quickening despite my calm exterior. "Grant has shared some concerning information," she began without preamble. "He claims these products were developed without proper authorization, outside established protocols, and at significant unbudgeted expense." I took a measured breath. All products were developed using Kitchenverse resources by Kitchenverse employees. The board approved our convention, participation, and budget. For the previously planned product line, Teresa clarified, "Not whatever this is." She gestured toward our crowded booth. "Did the board specify which products we should showcase?" I asked. Teresa frowned. "Not explicitly, but then we've fulfilled our obligation. We're representing Kitchenverse at the approved convention with products developed by our team. The expense was managed through voluntary overtime and resource reallocation. The financial report shows we're actually under budget for the quarter." Teresa's eyebrows rose. "That's not possible. Grant showed us projected losses." "Based on what assumptions?" I interrupted, pulling up the financial dashboard on my tablet. "Here are the actual numbers, verified by accounting yesterday." She studied the screen, her expression shifting from skepticism to confusion. "This doesn't align with Grant's presentation." "No," I agreed quietly. "It wouldn't." Our conversation was interrupted by a commotion at the main booth. The convention director was there, alongside representatives from the Innovation Awards Committee. They were smiling, holding a large acrylic trophy. "Kitchenverse has won Best in Show," Ava called over, her eyes shining. "Unanimous decision from the judges. First time in convention history." Teresa's gaze shifted between the celebration at our booth and the financial data on my tablet. "We'll continue this discussion back at headquarters, Ms. Nova." As she walked away, I spotted Grant near the exit, watching the award presentation with naked fury. Our eyes met briefly before he turned and pushed through the doors. The victory should have felt sweeter than it did. Instead, a hollow anxiety filled my chest. Grant wouldn't go down without a fight, and I'd just humiliated him on the industry's biggest stage. The next morning, I arrived at the office to find security stationed outside my door. "What's happening?" I asked the guard, a woman I recognized but had never spoken with directly. "Board meeting in progress, Ms. Nova. They've requested you wait until called." Through the frosted glass, I could make out several figures seated around the conference table. Grant's voice occasionally rose above the general murmur, though I couldn't make out his words. After 20 minutes, the door opened. Teresa gestured me in. The atmosphere inside was tense. Grant sat with a thick folder open before him, sticky notes protruding from the edges. The other board members watched me with expressions ranging from curiosity to disapproval. "Ms. Nova," Teresa began formally, "we've been reviewing some concerning patterns since your assumption of the CEO position." "What kinds of patterns?" I kept my voice neutral, though my heart hammered against my ribs. organizational disruption, disregard for established processes, unauthorized product development. She ticked off each point on her fingers. Grant has provided extensive documentation. Grant smirked. Did you really think you could tear apart 7 years of careful business building in a few weeks without consequences? I set my bag down and took the empty seat. May I see this documentation? Teresa slid the folder across to me. Inside were printouts of emails, meeting minutes, budget reports, all carefully selected and annotated to paint a picture of chaos and incompetence under my leadership. I flipped through slowly, recognizing Grant's tactics. I'd been on the receiving end of his manipulations for years. The difference now was that I understood the game. This is an interesting perspective, I said finally, closing the folder. May I offer another? Without waiting for permission, I opened my laptop and projected a series of charts onto the wall screen. These are our key performance indicators since the leadership transition. Customer engagement up 17%. Employee satisfaction improved by 23%. Production efficiency increased by 9% despite the rotation program. I clicked to the next slide, and here's the response to yesterday's convention showcase. Pre-orders have exceeded our quarterly projection by 40%. 3 major retailers have requested exclusive partnerships. The board members shifted in their seats, exchanging glances. Numbers can be manipulated, Grant interjected. What you can't measure is the damage to our company culture. People are confused, roles are blurred. The hierarchy that made us successful has been dismantled. Let's ask them, I suggested. Ask who? The employees. The people who make Kitchenverse work. Isn't that what this is really about? Whether the company is functioning better or worse under new leadership. Teresa considered this. What are you proposing? A company-wide feedback session. Anonymous input from every department. Let the data speak. Grant scoffed. They'll just say what they think you want to hear. Then we'll have a third party administer it, I countered. No possibility of influence from either of us. The board deliberated briefly before agreeing. They would select an independent consultant to gather employee feedback on both the old and new management approaches, with results presented in 1 week. As we filed out of the conference room, Grant caught up to me in the hallway. You've bought yourself a few days, he said under his breath. Enjoy them. When the board sees how you've turned their smooth operation into a hippie cooperative, they'll beg me to take over. I watched him stride away, his confidence unshaken despite everything. For a moment, doubt crept in. What if he was right? What if the employees preferred the familiar hierarchy to my disruptive approach? That afternoon, I sat alone in Harrington's office. My office now, though it still didn't feel that way, reviewing the documentation Grant had presented to the board. His selective editing was masterful. A shifted context here, an omitted detail there, and success transformed into chaos on paper. A knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. Cam stood there with several other designers. We heard about the board meeting, he said without preamble. The whole building's talking about it. My stomach tightened. And we've been collecting something. He stepped forward, placing a thumb drive on my desk. Every email where Grant took credit for someone else's work. Every meeting where he shot down innovation, then presented it as his own months later. Every time he manipulated budgets to make other departments look inefficient. I stared at the small device. How long have you been gathering this? Years, one of the other designers replied. At first, just to vent our frustrations. Then, when things got really bad, as protection. We never had anyone to show it to before, Cam added. Old Man Harrington was too removed from daily operations by the end, and HR reported directly to Grant. I picked up the thumb drive, turning it over in my fingers. I can't use this to undermine him. It would look like exactly what he's accusing me of, personal vendetta rather than business decisions. We know, Cam nodded. But we thought, maybe it could help you understand what you're really up against. Grant doesn't just want his position back. He wants to erase every trace of change you've brought. After they left, I plugged in the drive. Hours of evidence unfolded before me, a systematic campaign of credit stealing, blame shifting, and strategic sabotage that made my experience look tame by comparison. Grant hadn't just targeted me, he'd created an entire culture of fear and division. The next morning, I called Ava to my office. I need to understand something, I said, gesturing for her to sit. The night of the holiday party, you were the one who announced I was CEO. How did you know before the official announcement? Ava smiled slightly. I didn't. Not for certain. Then why? Because I was in the room when Harrington was updating his succession plan, she explained. As head of financial operations, I had to verify certain details. He never explicitly told me you were his choice, but I saw which files he was reviewing. After that, I paid attention, noticed the lawyers visiting, connected the dots. So when Grant humiliated me at the party, I took an educated guess that the announcement was coming. The timing seemed too perfect. I leaned back, studying her. Why help me? We barely knew each other. Ava's expression hardened. Because I spent 5 years watching Grant crush anyone with real talent. Because Harrington built something special before his nephew started dismantling it. Because that night at the party, when no one else would stand up, somebody had to. Her words crystallized something I'd been feeling since taking over. This wasn't just about my personal redemption. It was about honoring Harrington's vision. A company where innovation thrived because people worked together instead of against each other. The week of the employee feedback survey was the longest of my life. Grant worked the halls like a politician, stopping to chat with people who'd previously been beneath his notice. His charm turned to maximum intensity. I focused instead on continuing our momentum from the convention. We secured 2 major retail partnerships and began planning production scaling for the new product line. I made a point of spending time in each department every day, listening more than talking. On the morning the results were due, I arrived to find the parking lot unusually full. Inside, the office hummed with anticipation. The board had called an all-hands meeting to discuss the findings, something unprecedented in company history. The main presentation room filled quickly. I took a seat in the front row, conscious of Grant choosing a position directly across the aisle. His expression was carefully neutral, but a slight smile played at the corners of his mouth. Teresa took the podium, flanked by the other board members. Thank you all for your participation in the feedback process, she began. The response rate was 97%, the highest engagement we've ever seen for an internal survey. She clicked to the first slide, which showed a simple comparison chart. When asked about company direction, 78% expressed greater confidence in the current leadership approach, versus 12% preferring the previous structure. 10% were neutral. Grant's smile vanished. Teresa continued through the results, each slide revealing stronger support for the changes I'd implemented than even I had expected. The rotation program specifically received 82% approval, with many commenting that it has improved cross-departmental understanding and cooperation. As Teresa neared the end of the presentation, Grant stood abruptly. This is clearly rigged, he interrupted. These people are afraid of losing their jobs if they speak against the new regime. A murmur ran through the crowd. Teresa frowned at the interruption. The survey was anonymous, Mr. Harrington, administered by an independent third party specifically to prevent such concerns. Then they've been manipulated by weeks of organizational disruption. They don't understand what they're giving up. Stability, clear hierarchy, proven processes. From the back of the room, a voice called out, "We know exactly what we're giving up." Heads turned to see Dina from production standing. "We're giving up having our ideas ignored. We're giving up watching good people leave because they can't advance. We're giving up pretending not to see when someone takes credit for someone else's work." Others began standing too, adding their experiences. Each story was another nail in the coffin of Grant's leadership style. The board members exchanged glances, their verdict becoming clear without a word being spoken. When the room finally quieted, Teresa cleared her throat. In light of both the survey results and this spontaneous feedback, the board has unanimously decided to formally endorse Ms. Nova's leadership and organizational approach. The room erupted in applause. I sat motionless, the sound washing over me as I watched Grant's face cycle through shock, rage, and finally, a cold calculation that sent a chill down my spine. The meeting dispersed with an energy I'd never felt in the building before. People lingered, talking excitedly about upcoming projects. As I made my way toward the exit, Grant stepped directly into my path. "Congratulations," he said, voice low enough that only I could hear. You've won them over with promises and participation trophies. But running a company isn't a popularity contest. No, I agreed. It's about creating value for customers, for employees, for shareholders. We'll see how much they all love you when the quarterly numbers come in. Innovation is expensive, Petra. Those prototypes you rush to market will have production issues you never anticipated. The rotation program is burning hours that should be dedicated to specialization. His certainty gave me pause. Grant had been in the business longer than I had. What if he was right? What if my vision couldn't translate to sustainable success? He must have seen the doubt flicker across my face because his expression shifted to something almost sympathetic. It's not too late, he said. We could work together. Your ideas, my experience. I could help you avoid the pitfalls. For a brief moment, I imagined it. A truce, a partnership, an end to the constant battle. Then I remembered the years of belittlement, the stolen credit, the cake sliding down my face while he laughed. I appreciate the offer, I said carefully, but I think we have fundamentally different visions for this company. His face hardened. Then you'll fail, and I'll be there to pick up the pieces. As he walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that Grant wasn't finished, that his apparent defeat today was just setting the stage for something else, something I wasn't prepared for. I had won the battle for kitchen versus soul, but the war, that was just beginning. The next morning, I walked into my office to find an envelope on my desk, thick cream paper with the board's letterhead. Inside was formal confirmation of my permanent appointment as CEO, along with performance targets for the coming year. The numbers were ambitious, very ambitious. Growth projections that would require flawless execution of our new product launches and significant market expansion. I ran the calculations twice, frowning at the results. These weren't just challenging goals. They were nearly impossible without substantial additional investment or a miracle. When I called Teresa to discuss, her response was polite but firm. The board has full confidence in your leadership approach, Petra. Now we need to see that translate to financial results. Grant raised valid concerns about the cost of innovation. The subtext was clear. Emotional support from employees wouldn't matter if the numbers didn't follow. I hung up and stared out the window at the parking lot below. Early arrivals were streaming in, coffee cups in hand, moving with the purposeful energy that had been missing under Grant's leadership. A knock at my door revealed Ava, tablet in hand. You've seen the targets? Just now, I confirmed. They're setting us up to fail. Not us. You. She sat across from me. Grant spent an hour with the board after yesterday's meeting. He's still a major shareholder, still has his uncle's name, and still wants his position back, I finished. So what's our move? Ava tapped at her tablet, bringing up a series of projections. We can hit their revenue targets if we push production to capacity on the new line. The risk is quality control. Rushing could mean returns and warranty issues down the line, which would create exactly the kind of crisis Grant is waiting for, I mused. Exactly. He's playing a longer game now. He doesn't need to undermine you directly anymore. He just needs you to stumble. Over the next weeks, I felt the weight of those expectations in every decision. We scaled production carefully, instituting triple-check quality protocols that slowed output but ensured perfect products. We expanded marketing cautiously, testing messaging in smaller markets before national rollouts. The board grew impatient. Weekly updates turned into twice-weekly demands for acceleration. Grant began appearing at stakeholder meetings he'd previously ignored, asking pointed questions about timelines and budgets. 3 months into my permanent tenure, disaster struck. A shipment of temperature-sensing components from our primary supplier arrived contaminated with microscopic metal fragments, invisible until they caused shorts during assembly. We discovered the issue during final testing, but not before we'd built 3,000 units. The entire batch would need to be disassembled and rebuilt. This will put us at least 2 weeks behind schedule, Cam reported grimly. And the replacement components will cost an additional 30,000. Do we have a backup supplier? I asked. Not for this specific component. It's proprietary. I massaged my temples, feeling the first throb of a stress headache. How did this happen? Our quality checks should have caught this at intake. Cam shifted uncomfortably. That's the strange part. The initial samples tested perfectly. It's only the production batch that's contaminated. A chill ran through me. Who handled the supplier relationship? That would be. Cam checked his notes. Regional procurement, Grant's former department. Later that day, I requested the complete communications history with the component supplier. Hours of reading revealed nothing explicitly suspicious, but several unusual protocol deviations caught my attention. The production batch had been routed through a different inspection facility than usual. The paperwork had been signed off by an employee who'd recently transferred from Grant's old team. I couldn't prove sabotage, but the pattern was too convenient to ignore. That evening, I called an emergency meeting with my core leadership team. I believe we're being deliberately undermined, I stated bluntly. The component issue isn't random bad luck. Reactions ranged from shock to grim acknowledgement. If you're right, Ava said, we need to approach this strategically. Going to the board with accusations will look like paranoia without concrete evidence. And Grant knows exactly how to cover his tracks, added Cam. He's had years of practice. We decided on a 3-part approach. First, solve the immediate production crisis. Second, implement new security protocols throughout our supply chain. And third, quietly investigate the suspicious patterns without alerting Grant. Days blurred into weeks as we fought to recover from the setback. I worked 18-hour days, splitting time between production floor troubleshooting and appeasing increasingly concerned board members. The leadership team rallied around me, each taking on additional responsibilities without complaint. Grant, meanwhile, maintained a concerned but detached presence, offering helpful suggestions in board meetings while expressing doubts about our ability to recover. 6 weeks after the component crisis, we were finally back on track. Quality control had been completely restructured, with redundant checks at every stage. Production was running at 110% capacity to make up for lost time. Early market response to our products exceeded even our optimistic projections. I began to breathe easier. Perhaps we would hit those impossible targets after all. Then came the customer service report. A small but growing number of returns were coming in. Temperature-sensing spoons activating at incorrect times, causing minor burns. Not enough to trigger a recall, but enough to damage our reputation and slow sales momentum. Technical analysis confirmed my worst fears. The affected units all contained components from a specific production batch that had somehow bypassed our enhanced quality controls. This time, I had proof. Security footage showed after-hours access to the production area by someone using credentials that should have been deactivated, credentials belonging to a former employee from Grant's department. The tampering was subtle but unmistakable. Calibration settings adjusted just enough to pass initial testing but fail during actual use. With evidence in hand, I scheduled an emergency board meeting. Grant arrived, looking supremely confident, settling into his chair with the air of someone about to witness a long-anticipated victory. Before we begin, he said smoothly, I've taken the liberty of preparing some contingency options for leadership transition, given the current challenges. Teresa frowned. That's premature, Mr. Harrington. We're here to discuss the product issues. I connected my laptop to the display and began my presentation. Methodically, I walked through the evidence of tampering, the suspicious access patterns, the connections to Grant's former team members. These aren't random quality issues, I concluded. They're deliberate sabotage. Grant's expression never wavered. This is desperate scapegoating, nothing more. If there have been security breaches, they happened under your leadership, Petra. The responsibility is yours. I agree completely, I replied, surprising him. As CEO, all company operations are ultimately my responsibility, which is why I've already implemented a solution. I clicked to the next slide, revealing a completely redesigned component that looked similar to the problematic one but with subtle differences. 2 weeks ago, we quietly switched to this modified design. It looks identical to the previous component but functions on completely different internal architecture. Only 5 people in the company knew about the change. I clicked again, showing sales and performance data. The products with this new component have 0 failure rate after 3,000 hours of testing and 2 weeks in consumer hands. Grant's confident smile faltered slightly. Furthermore, I continued, we captured this 3 days ago. The next slide showed security footage of the same unauthorized access. But this time, the individual was clearly attempting to tamper with components that no longer existed in our production line. The board members leaned forward, expressions hardening as they realized the implications. We tracked the security credentials used, I explained. They belonged to an account that was supposedly deactivated but was secretly reactivated through administrative access. Access that traces back to this IP address. The final slide showed login data with an IP address highlighted. That's the guest network in this building, Teresa said slowly. Used primarily by board members and visiting executives. I finished, specifically from this conference room during the hours of board meetings. When one particular person consistently arrives early and stays late, all eyes turned to Grant, whose face had gone very still. "This is absurd," he said, but his voice lacked its usual conviction. "Anyone could have used that network." "True," I acknowledged, "which is why we didn't rely solely on that evidence." I nodded to Ava, who distributed folders to each board member. Inside, you'll find detailed forensic analysis of the tampering incidents, communication records showing coordination between involved parties, and sworn statements from 2 employees who were pressured to participate in exchange for promises of advancement after the leadership change. Grant stood abruptly. "This is a setup. You're framing me because you can't handle the job. The evidence speaks for itself," Teresa said quietly, already reviewing the contents of her folder. "And it's compelling, Mr. Harrington." What followed was the longest 40 minutes of my professional life. The board excused Grant and me, deliberating alone while we waited separately. I sat in a small conference room, watching the minute hand tick with excruciating slowness, wondering if I'd done enough, if the evidence would outweigh Grant's name and history with the company. When the call came to return, I walked back into the boardroom on legs that felt unnaturally stiff. Grant was already seated, his expression unreadable. Teresa didn't waste time. Based on the evidence presented, the board has unanimously decided to suspend Mr. Harrington from all company activities pending a full investigation. His shareholder voting rights will be held in escrow during this period. Grant's face flushed dark red. "You can't do that. My uncle built this company." "Your uncle built this company on integrity and innovation," Teresa replied evenly, "both of which you've actively undermined. The legal team is already preparing to refer this matter to the appropriate authorities for criminal investigation." As security arrived to escort Grant from the building, he turned to me with naked hatred. "You think you've won? This isn't over. I still have friends here, loyal people who understand what really matters in business." I said nothing, watching as he was led away, still making threats and predictions of doom. In the aftermath, we discovered the full extent of Grant's sabotage network. Nearly a dozen employees placed strategically throughout the company, each responsible for creating small problems that together would have eventually caused a catastrophic failure in our new product line. Most claimed they'd been coerced or manipulated, afraid of losing their positions if they didn't comply. The next 6 months were transformative. Without the constant undermining, our innovations flourished. The rotation program evolved into a cross-functional training system that became the envy of the industry. Employee retention reached an all-time high, and those impossible financial targets, we exceeded them by 12%. 1 year to the day after the cake incident, we held another holiday party. The atmosphere couldn't have been more different, genuine celebration rather than tense formality. I stood on the same spot where I'd been humiliated, now addressing the company as its successful leader. "Today isn't just about celebrating our achievements," I told the gathered employees. "It's about recognizing how far we've come by working together rather than against each other." As I finished my speech to enthusiastic applause, Ava approached with a curious expression. "You have a visitor," she said, nodding toward the entrance. "Says you're expecting him." I wasn't expecting anyone, but when I turned, understanding dawned immediately. Grant stood in the doorway, looking considerably less polished than he once had. The criminal investigation had been settled with a plea deal. No jail time, but significant financial penalties, and a ban from serving as an officer in any public company for 5 years. 5 minutes, I told Ava, then have security escort him out. I crossed to where Grant waited, maintaining a professional distance. "This is a private event. You're not welcome here." "I came to make peace," he said, though his eyes held no warmth. "The legal matters are settled. I thought perhaps we could discuss my remaining ownership stake." "There's nothing to discuss. Your shares remain in escrow until the board determines otherwise." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Be reasonable, Petra. I've lost everything else. Those shares are my legacy from my uncle." "Your legacy?" I couldn't help the incredulous tone. "Your legacy was the chance to build on what your uncle created. Instead, you spent years tearing down anyone who threatened your ego." His facade of humility cracked. "You think you're so clever. One lucky break and suddenly you're untouchable. You have no idea what it takes to maintain a company like this." "Actually, I do. That's why we're thriving now." A server approached with a tray of desserts, including slices of vanilla cake identical to the one Grant had once smashed in my face. "Cake?" I offered, taking a plate. "It's quite good." His eyes narrowed at the obvious reference. "You think this is funny? You destroyed my life." "No, Grant. You destroyed your own life. I simply refuse to let you destroy mine too." I set the cake down untouched. "Now, here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave quietly. Tomorrow, you'll receive paperwork offering to buy out your escrowed shares at current market value, which, I should mention, is significantly higher than when you were involved." "And why would I sell?" "Because the alternative is the board voting to convert your common shares to a special class with no voting rights and restricted dividends. The lawyers assure me it's perfectly legal, given the circumstances of your departure." His face paled slightly. "You can't do that." "I'm not doing anything. I'm offering you a clean, profitable exit. Take the money, Grant. Start over somewhere else." Security had materialized nearby, watching our interaction closely. Grant's jaw worked as he processed his options. Finally, he gave a stiff nod. "Send the paperwork." As he turned to leave, I called after him. "One more thing." He paused, looking back with thinly veiled contempt. "I never wanted your job, you know. I just wanted respect for my work." Everything that followed, the rotation program, the organizational changes, the successful products, those weren't about revenge. They were about building the company your uncle always envisioned. For just a moment, something like understanding flickered across Grant's face. Then it hardened again into bitter resignation as security escorted him from the building for the final time. I returned to the party, where Cam waited with a genuine smile. "Everything okay?" "Everything's perfect," I replied, feeling a weight lift that I hadn't even realized I was carrying. For the first time in 7 years, everything's exactly as it should be. Later that evening, as employees danced and celebrated, I slipped away to the quiet of my office, Harrington's office, that had finally, truly become mine. On the shelf stood a small, unassuming object, the very first prototype I'd ever created for Kitchenverse, a simple gadget that solved a common kitchen problem. Harrington had kept it all these years. I picked it up, turning it in my hands, remembering the pure joy of creation that had brought me here in the first place. Not ambition, not revenge, but the simple desire to make something useful and beautiful. My revenge against Grant hadn't come from public humiliation or career destruction, though he'd certainly experienced both. My true revenge was proving that his entire philosophy was wrong, that collaboration trumped competition, that lifting people up created more success than putting them down, that the company could thrive because of kindness rather than despite it. In the end, I hadn't just reclaimed my designs or my dignity. I'd transformed the entire culture into something Grant could never have built or understood. And watching him realize that, seeing him finally comprehend that his approach had always been fundamentally flawed, that was a satisfaction deeper than any momentary triumph could provide. The company holiday party continued below, the sounds of laughter and conversation floating up to my quiet sanctuary. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new innovations, new opportunities to build rather than destroy, and I was ready for all of it. If you've ever faced someone who tried to dim your light instead of finding their own brightness, I hope this story reminds you that success truly is the best revenge. Not success as the world often defines it, with titles and power, but success on your own terms, built on your own values. Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please subscribe for more. Remember, the people who try to tear you down are already below you. Keep rising.